What's going on, people? Welcome back to another video on the YouTube channel. Hope everyone's having a good day today. Before we get into it, can I ask everyone to like this video, subscribe to the channel as well if you're into boxing. Um, Wanted to make a video today about an interview that came out yesterday. It was an interview with John Fury, and that came out. He was touching on things such as his relationship with Tyson, uh, his thoughts on Tyson coming back to boxing, and it was very interesting to hear his take. Obviously, a lot of the things John Fury, he is very knowledgeable in the sport, been around the sport, and his interviews very honest, wears his heart's on his sleeve, and I do like listening to his interviews, although obviously some of his his antics at of Tyson Fury's press conferences are questionable. I do believe a lot of that stuff is just to, bring the spotlight back onto him, bring the spotlight back onto the Furies, because, that is what is going to be, making headlines. And I do think he is smart when it comes to that type of stuff. Like, for instance, at the at the Arsenal Mahmudov press conference, his antics, going at Carl Froch back and forth, trying to, make a fight with Carl Froch. It's all very smart. But in the interview, he talked about Tyson Fury being past his best, which I do agree with. Being 38 years old, having the trilogy fights with Wilder. Although in the first fight, I do think that was just having to lose a lot of weight, to come back to be able to fight Wilder. That's what drained Tyson. The second fight with Wilder, um, you know, he dominated Wilder from the first bell to the end, so he didn't take much punishment there. The third fight, did take a lot out of him, so I do agree with John Fury on that. That the third fight took a lot out of him. He left everything in the ring in that night, and you can tell from the performance. He was dropped twice in that fight, so obviously, and one of the right hands that Wilder did land on him in the third fight, it still stays in my mind. You can hear the thud of the shot, and obviously it sent a ripple down Tyson Fury's body, and it was right on the top of it was right on the top of his head where Wilder landed the shot, and Tyson Fury, just got up like he always does. He also mentioned that the Usyk fights that he fought that Usyk basically did beat Tyson uh, in the final rounds down the stretch, which obviously is true because I do think Usyk beat Tyson both fights. At first, obviously, I'm a Fury fan. When I was watching the second Fury and Usyk fight, I did actually think at first I thought Fury, had done enough. But then when sometimes your emotion takes over you. But then when I rewatched it, Usyk definitely, landed the bigger shots down the stretch and, took control of the fight like he always does down the stretch. So I don't agree with John in that sense because, it was clear that, Tyson just didn't have quite enough to beat him. Um, One other thing you mentioned as well was, the situation with Tyson Fury's trainer at the minute, and said that, in boxing, you got to have the right people around you because people are not really in it for the fighters. And, the people around you and your team have to have the best interest for the fighter. And, in this game, everybody knows, that everyone wants to see how much money they can extract from somebody. So it's important that you have the right people around you so they're not just, you know, telling you the things that you want to hear rather than telling you the truth, which is a good point. And obviously, with him being Tyson Fury's dad, he was basically saying that he would have always gave him the best advice, and told him that after the Usyk fight, he should have just not come back to the sport, which is a good point. And then mentioned Sugar Hill, his trainer, mentioned that basically Sugar Hill is basically living off his uncle's name, which was Emmanuel Stewart. He was a great trainer, and basically said he was basically not as good as you know he's basically living off the Stewart name basically, and said to said to him that he didn't. He's basically said that he does not rate Emmanuel Stewart as a trainer, and I just don't think that nowadays in boxing that people are blaming trainers for fighters losing fights, and sometimes that's not the case because, for example, the Tiafimo fight versus Shakur Stevenson, a lot of people were giving stick to Tiafimo Lopez Senior for the advice that he was giving Tiafimo in the fight, and in my opinion, obviously, that with him being his father, he knows what to say to him, which is best to get the best out of his fighter. Although some people would say he wasn't giving him clear instructions and a clear game plan, you know, it didn't matter what game plan he would have had that night. I just still think he weren't going to be good enough to beat Shakur. Which I understand why people say that he should have had his father should have been giving him clear instructions, a game plan, and tactics. But at the end of the day, the father knows best on how to get the best out of the fighter. Tyson Fury not being involved in this fight is valid, and basically goes on to saying that Tyson has not respected him or give him any props for being his dad, being his trainer, having his best interests. And also, he basically said how every time he's told Tyson to not come back to the sport, Tyson's always come with an excuse, like for the Ngannou fight. He said that Tyson Fury's excuse was the fact that he didn't have any sleep. That's why his performance against Ngannou wasn't what they expected. So you know, it seems to me that Tyson Fury's ego is being the main part of him coming back to the sport. Is he coming back for the right reasons? I don't personally think so. I feel like I said, sometimes it's the right time to when it's the right time to leave the game. You have to leave the game. Like I said, Tyson Fury will be fighting on Netflix April against Arslan Makhmudov. And John Fury did say that Arslan Makhmudov is not a great fight for Tyson at this point in his career. With Tyson being 38, he should have said. And he also mentioned how Usyk has gone about it smart. Usyk's fighting a kickboxer who's obviously not a professional boxer, and then he's basically saying that Tyson Fury's he's going to be fighting the wrong fights in order for the Usyk trilogy, and he said that basically he should have just took the trilogy and called it there, because by the time the trilogy comes with Usyk, which I do believe will happen, Tyson Fury would have literally nothing left in the tank, which I do agree with. I do think that they will be able to rekindle their relationship after this. How he looks on in April against Arslan Makhmudov. Love or hate him, everyone will be watching that fight. Most boxing fans will be watching it, so it'll be interesting to see. But anyway, people, that's going to be it for today's video. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again in the next one.